Hi there. Welcome back to Supercharge Fridays. This is our place to hang out every single Friday at 2 p.m. Central European Time. How are you doing? Jump in the comments. We have such a juicy topic here. We are going to be talking about all these big companies and all of the things you need to think about, and not just the good that comes with working in a large company like job security, job safety, all of that stuff. I know there's a little bit of a delay between me going live and actually being live. So pop in the comments so I know this is working, the tech, all of that stuff. We just have to make sure it works the way it is supposed to. If we haven't met before, hi, my name is Sonal. I'm founder of Supercharge Career Strategist. And this is one of the things I do. It's coaching, digital courses, and content like this every Friday, and also a podcast which is on Spotify and Apple, where we speak with amazing guests from around the world on how they got hired. The podcast is called How I Got Hired. So, without further ado, I can't wait to speak with my guest today, Elise Finn. Elise was actually live with me about a year and a half, more than a year and a half ago. And we talked about the challenges that are faced by people in the middle rung in companies, right? They're like pressure from above, pressure from below. There's like that sandwich. And today we're going to be talking about all of these challenges that people are facing, not just at the middle but across at different levels. Without further ado, Elise, welcome back to Supercharge Fridays. It's so good
Hi,
to have you back.
Sonal. Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me again.
Of course, my pleasure. And we have live comments coming in. It's always nice to, speak with a lovely audience. We have a lovely audience here on Supercharge Fridays. Thank you for tuning in. I'd love to hear your questions. Good morning to those in the United States and North and South America, and good afternoon, of course, in Europe, and good evening in Asia. So we're going to get into it. The topic is going to be about, just in case you need a refresh, your career in a large company, right? Elise, because a lot of us have been brought up with this idea that, oh, just get in and you're set for life. you know so before we get like deep into it, for anyone who's not familiar with you, Elise, tell us a little bit about what it is you do today.
Okay. Well, probably it makes sense to talk a bit about where I've come from, not just
Yeah.
what I'm doing today. So
Yeah.
for this topic particularly. So for the first 33 years in my career, I worked in those big companies, big financial services companies mostly. I started at NCR. That's the company that makes the cash machine. So every time you go and draw money out from a hole in the wall, that's NCR probably in terms of the machine that you're using. I then spent about 12 years at Lloyd's and which became Lloyd's TSB, which is a big UK financial services organisation. And then I joined Reuters, the financial arm of Reuters, which then became Thomson Reuters. So 33 years in three different, very large, global, matrixed organisations. And during those 33 years, I really learned what it takes to be successful in those big organisations, because a lot of the time I wasn't. So it took me a while to work out what it really takes to be successful in a big company, because there are specific powers at play. There are specific challenges that people who work in big companies need to understand. They need to understand the powers at play, and they need to understand how to navigate the matrix to really take control of their career. And during that 33 years, I saw some great success. So my functional expertise is marketing. And for the last 10 years of my career, I was very senior in marketing in Thomson Reuters. And I was CMO of one of their businesses that we actually then spun off and sold to venture capital, rebranded, relaunched. And at that point, about 7 years ago, I decided I'm going to change, take what I know about big companies and careers in big companies, and help those big companies really unlock the power of their people, because they can get squashed. One of the things that we don't talk about in terms of the things that happen in big company cultures is the people, particularly in the middle, can get really squashed. They get squashed from the top, they get squashed from pressure from the bottom.
Yeah.
So that's what we do now. We launched
Yeah.
a business called Nkuzi Change, and
Yeah.
we help big companies unlock middle leaders.
Amazing, amazing. So, if anyone is not familiar with Elise and her team and the beautiful work that they're doing at Incusi, I highly recommend go to LinkedIn, find her. Her name is written right here. Follow her, follow the work they're doing. They're doing amazing work with lots of companies, and I like that the approach. Unlock the potential, not something is wrong, let's fix it. Not that it's not coming from negative. It's more about like it's already there, let's help
Yeah.
you open it up and tap that potential. So beautiful. And the other thing I want to say, which is a completely sidetrack, nothing to do with what we're talking about today, is I want to just remind our audience, if you can, if you get the opportunity, do watch this replay and listen to this answer that Elise gave right now. I'm talking like you're not here, Elise, because it was a very well spun kind of history of events, and it was done in something like 90 to 120 seconds, if I recall correctly. It didn't go on and on. A lot of people, when tell me a little bit about yourself. When this question comes up to us, when we don't practice this sort of delivery, it can be a 5 or 10 minute answer. There's a very big difference between a 2 minute answer, a 10 minute answer. Like you will lose the audience. So, side thing I wanted to say before we get started, and I saw a very related topic, and I wanted to say to the person who posted the very related question, and Omkar, how can I make sure my current job is safe? What do you advise during layoff season? We're going to talk about this stuff, right? Elise, we'll make sure we get to your question. Any other questions, feel free to comment. But before we get like into how solving and getting into that mode, we first need to understand what's actually going on. There's a few specific challenges, and Elise, you giving your own spin to it because you're working with so many companies.
Hmm.
um, a lot of us are told, get in these big companies, life is going to be peachy, it's going to be sunny, it's going to be perfect. The reality on the ground is very different. There's a lot of good that comes from big companies. However, that's not the topic for today. We want to learn more about what are some of the hidden, not so obvious challenges. Elise, why don't you start with a couple that you have seen closely working with people?
Yeah. Well, over the past 2 years, we have worked with about 1,000 middle leaders in large organizations,
Wow.
companies like RSA, Marsh McLellan, the biggest insurance
Yes.
broker in the world,
Yes.
and a number of other, Six
Yes.
Financial, number of other big financial giants. And what we're hearing from those middle leaders is that times are really tough for them at the moment. And they are tough for middle leaders in large organizations right now for a number of reasons. And maybe some of the people that are listening to this can relate to some of these and see how they might be playing out in your life or career. So the first thing that people talk about is that COVID has changed their world. It's changed the world of work. And I think that's true for almost all of us.
Yeah.
But I think it's particularly true for the people who are in the middle of large organizations, because they were suddenly forced from their head office environments potentially into remote working, now maybe hybrid working, where they are away from a lot of the people that they rely on to get their work done. Because in large organizations, you can't do things by yourself. That's the reality. You have to work with and through other people because you're working on complex deliverables, and you're working in a matrix, and you all have your own different functional expertise. So the power of team is really, really important in big organizations. So I think that's the first thing, is that COVID, and as we've come out of COVID, has really changed the way we've worked. And I do think that it's a bit of a poison chalice. A lot of people have really benefited, maybe in some parts of their lives, from the flexibility that was forced, that was really forced through the experience of COVID. So now some of us can choose to work some of the time from home. Maybe we can choose the hours that we work so that we can be more flexible around our demands of the rest of our lives. But when you're working in a big organization and you're so reliant on your relationships with other people to get things done, that can just make it much harder, because people aren't available to you. They aren't with you physically, and they may not be working the same hours as you now either at all. So how do you get your work done?
Yeah.
That's a really big challenge.
Yeah.
And the work has got harder as well, I think. You know, we all know that there's some real staff shortages. There's
Yeah.
tons of conversations about the war on talent, and lots of chairs are empty at the moment in big organisations, and lots of
Yeah.
skills are missing. And we've seen organisations get flatter, and people, particularly middle leaders, not those positions, those middle management positions, not being replaced as people have left.
Yes. I'm so glad you're talking about this because everyone wants to glorify the benefits and the good stuff that's come out of remote working. And of course there is, and we're not going to deny that because it's the truth, right? There's a lot of good that's come out of it. However, there's so many stages of career that one has, right? And if you've had a very successful career, you've been there, done that. Let's say you have now the stage with little kids, etc. You've got a lot less to prove. However, if you're in a if you're someone else who doesn't belong to that substrata, and visibility matters whether we agree or not.
Yeah,
Visibility matters, top of mind
absolutely.
recall matters. Human beings are not perfect, right? We are biased human beings, and recency bias matters a lot.
Yeah.
So when important decisions are happening, oh, I just ran into Elise in the water cooler. Let's talk to her
Mm-hmm.
and see what she thinks. As opposed
Mm-hmm.
to someone who's 500 miles away, and you need to find out if they're available, get on Zoom with them, etc. Let's not underestimate the power of spontaneity when it comes to company cultures. And what you're saying is it's almost like a poisoned chalice. It sounds biblical in a way, but no, this is very key. And I see some very juicy comments here, and I promise we're gonna be getting into those. I wanted to highlight something, right? Because you said it comes down in the middle, like in spite of having deep pockets, some positions are not replaced.
Yeah.
It means you're doing more work than
Yeah.
before. But
Can
the
I
thing
can
is
I
that-
just say something on that though,
go
because I
ahead.
feel so passionately about this.
Yeah.
You know, Gallup tells us that line managers are responsible for 70% of our employee engagement scores.
Yeah. 70. Wow.
70%.
Yeah.
Like, forget everything else. Forget anything else you want to talk about in terms of culture. If we just focus on line managers. Now, line managers, there's tons of research to support this as well. The optimal number of people that we have reporting into us, the scope and scale
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
people reporting
Span
into
of
us.
control.
Yeah,
Yeah.
span of control is usually optimally about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yes, it depends by function, and yes, it depends by complexity, and yes, it depends, whether you're an individual contributor as well as a line manager, which most of middle leaders are actually, because they're functional experts as well as being line managers. But if you get into line managing more than 10 or 12 people, you can't possibly give them the time and attention that they deserve, frankly, first of all, because they are showing up for work each day, and they need time and attention. We all need to feel seen and heard and valued. And if we're not able to give people the time to be seen, heard, and valued, then it can really have a very destructive effect, not just on the individual, which is really important from a human point of view, but also on our employee engagement. And yet that is what we are seeing. We are seeing organizations get much flatter and spans of control getting bigger.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I have someone here, LinkedIn user, saying line managers are typically the ones which are, the heaviest, right? So the thinning out is happening, but it's hard, right? And Varsha says very rightly, you want to get stuff done and you want to chase people. Good luck. Because unfortunately it's hard. And there's a question here which is similar to the question that Omkar talked about earlier, which was about layoff season. So let's say this is happening, right? And we talked about a few challenges. Anything you want to add, Elise, in terms of other challenges that you've noticed with people, so that someone who's watching and listening today, want them to feel like we see you, we hear you.
Well, I mean, the other thing that we can't possibly overlook is the economic challenge that we're all kind of worried about at the moment.
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty,
Yeah.
Globally uncertainty. And that's another thing that COVID really highlighted to us, isn't it? That we are
Yeah.
an incredibly global connected community, no matter where
Yeah.
we are in the world. And
Yeah.
the effect of the economic pressure that we're all seeing now is creating a lot of uncertainty for lots of people. So some people who might have been thinking pre-COVID, actually, maybe I should, move on, maybe I should look for a new role somewhere else, but sat tight during COVID because it was really hard to move roles during that period, might now be thinking, but I can't move now either. Because, what if I make a mistake? What if I jump ship? And it's the wrong decision? Or, the economic pressure gets so much worse and all of the opportunities that we're seeing at the moment in the hiring marketplace disappear.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. Let's say you are at work, things are hard, but I would say on a scale, you're quite satisfied with where you are, what you're doing. You're quite happy with where you are. How do you ensure in large companies that your role remains safe? I'm putting that in quotes because I don't know what is safe anymore. But what have you seen, Elise, that works?
Well, when we're talking to middle leaders in large organizations about how they can take control of their career, the first thing that we talk about is understanding how career decisions are made in big organizations, because they are different. They are very different. The dynamics are different. The powers at play are different. The way decisions are made are different. So really understanding those dynamics that are at play in big organizations is important. And a couple of them that I can just highlight to you. Significant hires get approved and discussed at a committee level. It's very unusual for one single hiring manager to make the decision in isolation. They usually seek opinion. And that kind of reflects back on what I said earlier, when you're in the middle of a big organization, you can't get anything done without working with somebody else. You can't hire somebody else without 3 or 4 other people at least rubber stamping that hiring decision. So that means that your reputation, what you're known for, and your influence, who knows it, is much more important in big organizations than it is in smaller organizations, where the locus of control is much smaller. The number of people that you might want to influence might be smaller. In big organizations, you need to know who the players are and what they are thinking. What is their strategy? What matters to them? Where are they seeing opportunity or threats? And how you fit into that in terms of the value you can offer.
Yeah. So that's key. Understand how important business and people decisions are made. And the more, the higher the stakes, the chances are that decision is spread out and it's not one dictator who is, kind of like just going with the flow and seeing what they like. So that is really important. And what else, Elise? Because from your learnings, having coached 1,000 people, the ones that are getting more agency out of their own career.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest, the key ingredients, and it's we have 15 different coaching themes that we coach around. And when we're in coaching conversations, we listen for those themes so that we can understand what's kind of the underlying issue, what's the challenge that's really holding this individual back. And the most of all of those 15 coaching themes, the most prominent theme is confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that there is almost a negative magnetic pull on our confidence when we work remotely in large organizations. And I could go on about that for quite a long time. But I think the result of that, if we believe that is true, the result of that is, as individuals working in large organizations, we need to constantly build and own our own confidence. And how do we do that? Well, one of the things that we can do, which is a really practical thing, is really understand and own our strengths. Understand what we are good at and the value that we bring to the organization. And because knowing that allows us to do more of it. Naturally, it allows us to talk about it. It allows us to offer those strengths. And when we're able to do that, we attract opportunities around those strengths. And we get known for those strengths. That's part of our reputation. So paying attention to our confidence as the underlying challenge, because if we lack confidence, we can't talk about ourselves confidently. We're much more likely to put ourselves down than we are talk ourselves up. right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
paying attention to our level of confidence and then leaning into and understanding our strengths is one of the most practical and immediate things that we can do in order to be in the best place to
Yeah.
talk about ourselves in big companies.
Yeah. My gosh, that is so key. Because we think it's a given. And I kind of think of confidence like taking a shower. I got to work on it every day. It's not,
Every single day.
it's not a one and done
Not at
thing,
all.
right? I mean, you could be doing 200 live streams and still get a little nervous if there's a change or a big guest coming up or there's a tech issue, but it's building you up every time you're working through it. It's building you up. And I like that you talked about going from a place of strengths, because the questions that unfortunately get asked during interviews are more about, so what are you not good at? Tell me about your weaknesses. Like, good, you need to know that, but that isn't all
You need
about
to know
what
your blind spots.
you need to know
Yes,
your blind spots, but
absolutely.
that's not all that defines you, right? The strengths
No,
are there.
and it's so much more important to know what you're good at, to
Yeah.
understand where you fit in a big
Yeah.
organization. So I think about teams in big organizations as being pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, that when we understand how we can fit together, what my strengths are, what your strengths are, what the strengths of the team members are,
Yeah.
then we can cover each other's blind spots. Then we can look out for each other. Then together we can create this beautiful picture that alone we can't possibly even dream about, because
No,
we're only one small piece in this amazing jigsaw puzzle.
100%, 100%. So I'm so glad you mentioned it. And Paula says that's amazing for interviews as well. I think great minds think alike. And I wanted to now jump into the comments because there was one question here. Hey, Vishal, your question is a little bit unrelated to our topic, but I promise I'll get back to you in the comments. Purushottam has a solid comment here, but I would also appreciate you asking if there's a question here, because he's written some very interesting things. The balance between the old guard at big companies and standing true to the expectations of millennials, right? So many challenges. There's
Can we just
finding
stop
those.
there? Can we
Yeah,
just stop there? Because I love
yeah,
that one.
yeah.
And I have a real opinion about how leadership is shifting, especially in big organizations. I think that if we look at the traditional big organizations, a lot of them have fallen prey to the command and control type culture, where people in the middle are taught through the culture to wait for permission, to wait for instruction, to do as they're told, to wait for the detail. And what happens in those cultures is that people don't speak up, innovation dies, and creativity just dies with it.
Yeah.
And when we can't innovate and when we can't create and we can't speak up, we can't positively change ourselves or the organization. And so that is the death knell
Yes.
for big organizations who are locked in this command and control, this old guard, I think is a great way of saying it. Now, the companies that are going to be successful in shedding that culture, and this is what we've been working on with Nkosi Change over the past 2 years, in shedding that culture and moving to a empowered middle leadership culture, where middle leaders are actually able to lead their teams from a position of permission. You know, they're not waiting for it, they are taking it.
Yes.
And they're making things happen in a very dynamic way. Those
Yes.
will be the teams that people want to work on.
Beautiful.
And those will be the teams that will be able to innovate and will make sure that the company can stay relevant and can, you know, be successful in the future.
Yeah. Purushottam, thank you for your comment. We're going to move on, but there's so much that you've shared here, right? So I highly recommend those who are watching on YouTube or Facebook, check out comments on LinkedIn. There's always, great stuff that goes in there. There's a very interesting question here, Elise, from Ashish. He says, I'm in this large automotive company in India. I have a good offer, but it's a much smaller company in Germany. So, this whole thing of large, small, right? There's always pluses and minuses. At first glance, because there's so much more to it than meets the eye. At first glance, what would you recommend?
I would recommend looking at the culture of both of them. I don't think it's big versus small or, good versus bad.
Yeah.
I think it's much more about the culture, the values, the experience of working in that big organization.
Yeah.
I mean, I've worked in really massive organizations, 56,000 employees worldwide, and I've been able to act like an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur inside that business. And I've been able to do that because of the culture. not because it was big or small, but because of the culture that was either squashing me or empowering me.
I'm glad you said that, because we tend to vilify this big giant, too big to fail, everything is bad, move in a startup, wear many hats. There's pluses and minuses and everything. So it's not one versus the other, but the culture, I read somewhere, somebody wrote once, how would you define it? What is culture? It's the inherent character of the
I
company
have a
which
way of
shines
describing
through.
culture.
Yeah, yeah.
It's how we describe what it's like to work where we do when there's no other agenda. Right? So
Uh-huh.
when we are talking to our friends, our family, and they don't have an agenda, they're not looking for us to have an opinion in a certain way or not. They're just curious. They just want to
Yeah,
know. They're not judging.
yeah.
It's how we then feel free to describe what does it feel like to be a part of this team. That's
Nice,
culture.
nice. Ashish, I think it's worth doing that homework and finding out more about it, so that you make the decision that's right for you at the time. And Manmeet says this is so interesting because we did a training which was focused on line managers, and the result was better Gallup results 6 months later. So absolutely, in relation
It
to
works.
what you shared, absolutely. And I see a couple of questions here. Before the questions, I wanted to just also highlight a couple of very interesting comments as well. Risto's Hi Risto. He's shared a link as well on how do you make decisions, which company you should join. And Abhinav says, a great point about line managers accounting for 70%, but who keeps them engaged? The senior leaders in the company that have such an important role to play, given the exponential.
I've got a story to tell about this.
Yeah.
We at Nkuzi Change, we don't just coach the middle leaders. We always insist on coaching multi-layers within the organization. So we might be coaching 30 people at middle leadership level, but we're also coaching their boss and hopefully their boss as well. So we like to do 3 levels.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is you can't point to a group, whether it's the middle leaders or the senior leaders or the junior people in an organization, and say it's their fault. You can't do that. We own the culture. All of us.
Yeah.
Now, senior leaders have more power in that relationship. They cast a longer shadow.
Yes.
So leaving them out of the equation is crazy. It would be
Yes.
madness. So
Yes.
what my story, though, is one of the really hot topics that we get asked to solve in big organizations is moving from a passive, I'm not going to speak up, I have nothing to say, I'm just going to wait for permission to do something type of culture, to we want our people to speak up. We want to hear their voices. We want to put forward their ideas. And my first question to those senior leaders is, what are you doing to listen? Because there's no point speaking up.
Yes.
There's no point us coaching courage and confidence and proactivity as behaviors within those middle leaders if the last person that spoke up disappeared.
Yes.
Or the last person that spoke up wasn't listened to.
Yes. And there was such uncomfortable silence when you asked that question.
There has to be the yin to the yang. If we're going to coach a speaking up culture, we have to also coach the leaders, the senior leaders, to listen.
Yeah. No, 100%, 100%. I know that Abhinav is actually literally, as he's typing, he's on a flight from Sydney. So there's a comment from 30,000 feet in the air. Who keeps them engaged? I think it's the
That's
same
the
comment.
one we were talking about.
Good. That's the one we were talking about. Good.
Yeah.
And there's such a juicy question here. I'm loving all these questions here, Elise. There was a very interesting one about how do you navigate all of this when there's a merger and acquisition going on? It's complete chaos right now.
That really is my sweet spot, because but I actually started at Lloyd's before TSB bought Lloyd's. And then when we merged with TSB, we became Lloyd's TSB. Then we bought Chartered Trust, Standard Chartered, Scottish Widows. Very acquisitive period during the 90s for Lloyd's TSB. Then I joined Reuters, which was acquired by Thomson. So then we became Thomson Reuters. And I think I was involved in a number of acquisitions. I can remember off the top of my head 3 or 4 during the next decade. And then I was part of the sale. We actually spun the intellectual property and science business out. And I went from being on the acquiring side to being on the sold side
Wow.
of the big organization. So I've been there, seen it, done it, and got the t-shirt to match. Navigating it is it's kind of like an amplified version of what you need to do to manage your career anyway in a big organization. But when you're going through times of big change or big
Yes.
challenge, that's like it is through a mergers and acquisitions type program. That's when all of those issues become amplified. And that's when things like how are you managing your reputation and how are you building your influence and how are you building trust amongst the people who are the decision makers in that M&A process really matters. So I think that big business is more about relationships than it is anything else, because when the chips are down, it's people that make the decisions.
Relationships. And any specific tips here about relationships? Because, with the intent, because it's very overwhelming because there's so many new names each side. But what you have noticed working for you when it comes to starting relationships from scratch, who, where, what?
Well, we have an influence grid that we use with our coaches. And by the way, I'm really happy if anybody wants to delve deeper onto the topics of managing your reputation or crafting your reputation and building your influence as part of your big company career. I'm really happy to share the guides that we have that we use in our coaching conversations. It's brilliant when you're working with a coach, but you can use these guides by yourself as well. So, anybody who wants to reach out to me,
Perfect. Good to know.
you can DM me and I can share those guides. But in terms of building relationships, I think we need to bring it back to basics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really love the phrase, it's the small conversations that
Yes.
make the big ones possible.
Yes.
Because it's about those interactions, those daily interactions, those, yes, used to be water cooler moments, but now need to be much more kind of defined in our virtual or hybrid world. It's those conversations, those getting to know you conversations that build trust, that then allow us to broach some of the bigger conversations when the time is right. So start with the small stuff. And always make it about them and not about you.
Make it about them, not about you, which is easier said than done, because we have an agenda and we're saying don't talk about that agenda.
Put it to one side and ask
Put it
some
to one
curious.
side.
Put it to one side and ask some curious questions. What's going on for you at the moment?
Yeah.
Even the question, "How are you?"
Yeah.
And don't accept fine for an answer.
Yeah.
And then really listen. Really listen. And if you're really listening and you're present, then the conversation will flow. It's when we are only asking questions to look for a response, where we're just looking for a response, we're not listening to what the other person is saying, that conversations kind of tend to grind to a halt and we don't know where to go with them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a beautiful point about relationships. I think we can cover so much more on the topic of large companies and navigating your career and doing it with your own selfish intent and interest in ensuring it's what's best for you. Is there anything else you'd like to share, Elise, in terms of some
Well,
best practices?
I'm a massive fan of big companies. I spent 3 decades in big companies, and I was really incredibly lucky to be given the opportunities that I was given. But having said that, I do really understand the challenges that we are faced with in navigating our careers in big companies. And what I would say is the benefit can outweigh the challenge when we take control of our career. When we don't take control of our career, that's where the resentment lies. When we expect people to recognize what we are good at, when we expect our work to be recognized as valuable, when we expect our manager to manage our career for us, or even somebody in HR, maybe, that's when the challenge will overcome the opportunity. But when we put ourselves in the driving seat and we're prepared to do the work to own and manage our career, big companies can be an amazing place to work.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. There's There's always good and bad. You could be in a startup as well and be resentful and have a victim mindset, even though nobody will admit it here that we have a victim mindset. But it's like, I expected him to see that, well, no one's a mind reader, right? And if you've done something, you got to take control and you got to share it, and you got to share your achievements and how it's benefiting the company and how you're adding
Exactly.
value. But I think these points are very important, particularly the ones that you said, back to basics, because we don't do them. We don't do them enough. The one that where you mentioned ask questions without an agenda, that's a great way to build beautiful relationships. Who knows where they'll go? Maybe they'll stop, but who knows? It could continue and could be your future sponsor, champion, mentor.
Exactly.
You talked about building your confidence coming from a place of strengths, so that when opportunities come, you're like, hey, I'd love to do that. I'm actually really good at this type of project. Look, I've done it before. Coming from that, it comes from confidence, but yes, it also comes from strengths. You're not just faffing around, you're not just saying that. And also, the first thing you said was so key. Understand how important people decisions and business decisions are made behind the curtains.
Yeah.
You wanna share something here, Elise, because this is a big one, right? And you said, in larger companies they tend to be more structured. What are your tips on this particular one?
Well, I think one of the mistakes, if I can go there, that I made when in the first half of my career was that I focused way too narrowly on my functional area, and I built great relationships. I'm actually a natural introvert. I'm much better with small numbers of people and with a tight knit network. That's my natural go-to way of being. So I focused all of my attention and my relationship building in my own marketing area, in my functional area, and maybe into sales and maybe a bit into product, but not into technology or finance or, any of the other areas. And that was one of the mistakes I made, because in big organizations, all the functions matter because we are all working in this matrix.
Yes.
And if you can build relationships outside of your natural area of expertise and your function, not only will your job become easier because we all do impact each other, whether we see it or not, but you will meet some wonderful people that you wouldn't necessarily have met otherwise. So taking your functional area and kind of putting it to one side and saying, that's great, but I'm not going to stop there. Build a network that is much broader than that and do it with intention. That's where I would really go.
I'm 100% agree with this. I remember when I was in large companies, right? Like GE Capital, PwC, lunchtime is prime time to
Yeah.
practice what you just shared. I would always see the clicks of the same people meeting every time, almost the same place at the same time. It became this routine, like, 1
Well, and that's
o'clock.
our comfort zone, right? We have the same
It is our
conversations with
comfort
the
zone.
same people.
And people will say, "Don't tell me what to do during my lunch. I want to just chill out." I'm like, "Sure," but this advice, you don't have to do this 5 days a week. But I remember, when I was in a new country or in a new company and I didn't know anyone, I would, just be like, "Is anyone sitting here? May I sit with you?" I genuinely didn't
Exactly.
have anyone to sit with, so it wasn't like shame, or I was like, "I don't want to sit alone. I don't feel like it." But like, yeah, sure. And turns out people are actually very kind,
Yeah.
unlike what we see in movies in high school, where like, can I sit here? It's taken. Like those mean girl comments.
You don't
People,
usually get much of that.
you
No.
don't get that as an adult. People are genuinely like, oh yeah, you can sit here, as opposed to being, closed. And then you're like, but no, it turns out that person is a very interesting,
It's so much
character.
more interesting. It really is. Get outside of your echo chamber and go and meet some other people.
Oh my God, it's life
It makes
changing.
work more interesting and it makes work
Yeah,
easier because then
yeah.
you have the connections in the other areas when you need them. It's like that old saying, isn't it? Dig the well before you're thirsty.
100%, 100%. And you never know. You might just get some juice out of it, some champagne in that well. You never know. There's a very interesting comment here from Robert who says, I've worked with large and small companies, and it's always from the point of view of adding value to
Yeah.
saving the business and improving efficiencies. Management still wants more. At what point do you make the decision? Oh, brilliant. I'm so glad you're asking, Robert. At what point do you say, enough is enough?
Well, I would come back to the point of we all want to be seen, heard, and valued. Okay. There is no there's no problem in wanting more and having ambitious goals and targets and always wanting to stretch and step outside our comfort zone. There's no problem with that, as long as we continue to feel seen, heard, and valued. But when that starts to fall away and we don't feel seen, heard, and valued, and this comes back to a lot of the things I was saying earlier about the impact of line managers and senior managers on the culture, that's when it's time to move on. If we don't feel seen, heard, and valued, and we don't feel as though there is much more that we can do within that culture of being seen, heard, and valued, then that will crush your self-confidence, and it really is time to look somewhere else.
And I think, Robert, your gut will tell you the answer to this question. Are you seen? Are you heard? Are you valued? If you have a resounding, clear, I don't think so, no, 9, then it's like, okay, well, then you've got your work cut out for you, right? And one final question, Elise, then we're going to let you go. Noah says, big companies are amazing. But what do you do when you've been in the highest position for a long time in terms of absence of challenges, right? So you could be seen, heard, and valued, but you're not getting out of it what you're putting into it, maybe? That's what he's saying. Should you
It's time
say?
to start learning. It's time to start getting curious. It's time to start thinking about what next, what's coming down the line, what's the economic challenge bringing, what's the global situation bringing. Get out and talk to your industry peers. Get out of where you are because you're bored where you are. So take yourself somewhere else, not physically into a new job necessarily, but into different conversations. And turn on your tap of curiosity.
100%.
Because there's always more to do.
There's always more to do. And I like that you said earlier about, because I'm also a big fan of, getting back in the driver's seat of your career, right? Car career. And if you feel like you don't like where the car is going, then it's time to do something about it. And Noah, if you're watching, connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a podcast episode as well where I have these 6 clear signs when it's time to move on. And sign number 4 was learning. And it's exactly what Elise said. You could do the job with your eyes closed. You could do it on without thinking. That means you're stagnating. And it's not a good place. I mean, even water, right? A glass of water, which is sitting there for hours or days, you start noticing some stuff in it. It's time to throw it out. You can't drink from it. So brilliant. Elise, this has been really helpful. Before we let you go, so there's so much we've talked about. I did a quick recap already. If you're just joining us, please watch the replay because we covered a lot. Elise covered a lot. One final thing you want to tell someone who's watching today, who's kind of in this big company, listening to everything, what is that one thing you want them to walk away with?
I want you to get curious about what's possible. I think sometimes we, going back to this stagnated water, we can just sit there and be too passive. And we can fall into this, martyrdom, oh, woe is me type of situation. It's like just meet some different people, get curious about what's possible, have some different conversations, get yourself out of your echo chamber. And that will open up all sorts of different possibilities of different ways of thinking about where you are in your career.
Brilliant. Brilliant. This has been super helpful. Elise, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you to every single person who's joined this live. Hope this has been helpful. If you haven't already, follow Elise on LinkedIn and you're going to get a lot out of it.
Thanks. It was great talking to you. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Have a wonderful weekend. Bye, everyone.
Bye.